I was treated like a budget line item in the sprawling mansion I had secretly bought for them, silently enduring my son's coldness and 4-ounce portions of food. But at a dinner party with his boss, when I politely asked for a second rib, my son didn't just say no. He stood up and threw a heavy glass of ice water directly into my face. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply wiped the water from my eyes, walked to my room, locked the door, and made 2 phone calls. By the next morning, his credit cards were declined, his bank accounts were drained to zero, he was fired from his executive job, and an eviction notice was taped to his front door. Before I tell you exactly who was on the other end of those phone calls, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and please subscribe if you believe that a child's arrogance should never outgrow a parent's sacrifice. This story didn't start with that glass of water, but weeks earlier, with the quiet, lingering cold that had permeated my life since I moved in with Marcus and his wife, Naya. After my beloved Ruby passed away, the silence in my family home became unbearable, and Marcus begged me to come live with them. It is a massive house, he had said, more than enough room for all of us. And he was right about the size, because the house was a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial in a wealthy suburb of Atlanta, a house I had bought for them as a wedding gift, thinking it would be filled with the laughter of my grandchildren, but laughter was a rare sound in those hallways now. Instead, there was a polite quiet, a sterile orderliness that felt more like a hotel than a home. I had my own wing of the house with my own bathroom and my own sitting area, but I had never felt more like an intruder. The chill began at the dinner table. Marcus and Nia were often late coming home from their important marketing jobs and social events, so they would usually bring takeout from one of the trendy, expensive restaurants in the city. On this particular evening, the smell of grilled salmon and roasted asparagus filled the kitchen. Marcus placed a small white box in front of me. "I got you your favorite, Dad," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I opened the box, and inside was a piece of salmon that could not have been more than 4 ounces nestled on a small bed of wilted greens. It looked like a meal designed by a scientist to provide minimum sustenance. Meanwhile, he and Nia unpacked their own containers, revealing large ribeye steaks, baked potatoes loaded with sour cream and bacon and creamy spinach. The disparity was glaring. I am a 68-year-old man and not a large man by any means, but I have the appetite of someone who spent 40 years working in heavy construction. This was not a meal, it was an appetizer. But I said nothing. I just nodded and said, "Thank you, son." As I ate the perfectly cooked but unsatisfying fish, I felt a familiar pang of loneliness. It was not just about the food, it was about the message behind it. You are an expense, Isaiah. You are a budget line to be managed. Your needs are secondary. I was no longer the patriarch or the provider or the man who had worked his fingers to the bone to give his son every opportunity he never had. I was a resident, a dependent, and my dependency was being measured out in 4-ounce portions of salmon. That night, sleep did not come easily because the small meal left a hollow feeling in my stomach that no amount of water could fill. Around 2 in the morning, I decided to go downstairs for a glass of milk, hoping it might calm the hunger in my racing thoughts. The house was dark and silent. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the living room, a low murmur. It was Marcus and Naya. I paused in the shadows of the hallway, not wanting to disturb them, but then I heard my name and I froze. It was Nia, her voice sharp and clear as glass. "Did you see his face?" "Marcus," she asked. He looked like a kicked puppy when he saw that piece of fish. There was no sympathy in her tone, only a cold amusement. Marcus let out a heavy sigh. "He will get over it. Naya, the doctor said he needs to watch his cholesterol anyway, so we are just helping him." Helping him? The words were a cowardly excuse, and we all knew it. Nia laughed a short, humorless sound. "It is not just about his health, and you know it," she said. "It is about the budget, because his monthly expenses are starting to add up. The extra groceries and the higher utility bills and the medications are not insignificant." I stood there in the dark, with my hand gripping the banister so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. A budget line. That is all I was to them. The man who funded Marcus's Ivy League education, and the man who paid for their lavish wedding, and the man who bought the very house they were sitting in was now being discussed as a financial burden. Marcus sounded defensive now. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "He is my father, and I cannot just kick him out. Nia responded smoothly with a voice laced with venom. Of course not, darling. We are not monsters. But he needs to understand that things are different now because we are the ones in charge. He cannot just expect to live here for free without making some adjustments. He needs to contribute, or at least be more mindful of what he costs us. I did not need to hear any more. I turned and walked back up the stairs with my feet silent on the thick carpet. Each step felt heavier than the last. The hunger in my stomach was gone, replaced by a cold, so hard knot of betrayal. They were not my family anymore. They were my accountants, and they had just audited my worth and found it wanting. Back in my room, I did not turn on the light. I sat in the dark in my favorite armchair, the one Ruby and I had picked out together so many years ago. On the mantelpiece across from me was a framed photograph of her taken on our 40th anniversary just a year before she was taken from me. Her smile was radiant and her eyes were full of the love and warmth that had been the center of my world. Looking at her picture, the cold knot in my chest began to ache with a profound sadness. Ruby would have been horrified. She was a woman whose love language was abundance. Our home had always been a place of warmth and generosity, where the pots on her stove were never small. She cooked for an army, even when it was just the two of us. Our house is a place where no one ever goes hungry, she used to say, tapping a wooden spoon on the side of a bubbling pot of stew. It is a place where everyone is welcome. She had tried to instill that same generosity in Marcus. I remembered a time when he was just a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He had a bag of his favorite candies and was reluctant to share them with a friend who had come over to play. Ruby had knelt down beside him and spoken in her gentle but firm voice. Marcus, she said a joy that's not shared is only half a joy. The sweetness of the candy is nothing compared to the sweetness of seeing your friend smile. That little boy had learned the lesson, and he had split the bag of candy without another thought. Where did that boy go? I wondered, staring into the darkness. How did he become a man who measured his father's worth in dollars and cents? A man who rationed food under the guise of caring for his health. The woman in the photograph would not recognize the man her son had become. And in that moment, I realized with a painful clarity that I did not recognize him either. The man I had raised, the boy who once shared his candy so freely, was gone. In his place was a stranger, and I was living in a stranger's house. The final crack in the foundation of our relationship appeared a week later during a blistering Georgia heat wave. The air was thick and heavy, and the air conditioning unit in my wing of the house, which was older than the main system, chose that moment to finally give up. The air coming from the vents was warm and stale. I mentioned it to Marcus that evening as he was rushing out the door to a tennis lesson. The AC in my room is not working, son. I think the unit might be broken. Marcus barely broke his stride. I will get right on it. Dad, he called over his shoulder as he disappeared into the garage. I will make a call first thing in the morning. The morning came and went, and then the afternoon passed. The temperature in my rooms climbed steadily, turning my comfortable suite into a sauna. I called Marcus on his cell phone, but he did not pick up, so I left a message. Later that evening, Nia knocked lightly on my door. I heard about the AC, she said, standing in the doorway, fanning herself with a magazine. Marcus is just so swamped at work that it totally slipped his mind. These things are so expensive to fix, you know. Have you tried using the ceiling fan because it might be better for you anyway and less artificial? Her suggestion was so dismissive and so utterly lacking in concern that it left me speechless. For 2 more days, I slept poorly, waking up in a pool of sweat. Marcus continued to be swamped, and Nia continued to be unconcerned. I realized with a heavy heart that they were not going to do anything because it was not a priority. My comfort was not a priority. On the 3rd day, I decided I'd had enough. I found the number for a reputable repair company myself. They sent a technician out that same afternoon. An hour and $400 later, cool air was once again flowing through the vents. I paid the bill from my own retirement savings. The relief was immediate. Later that evening, Marcus saw the invoice I had left on the kitchen counter. He came to my room looking mildly embarrassed. Dad, you did not have to do that, he said. I told you I would handle it. His words were hollow, a pathetic attempt to salvage his image as a dutiful son. I just looked at him and nodded slowly. "I know what you said, Marcus." I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "But sometimes a man has to take care of himself." He did not understand the double meaning in my words. He saw it as the end of a minor household problem. I saw it as the end of my willingness to depend on him for anything. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Marcus and Nia were hosting a dinner party. This was not a casual get-together with friends. This was an event. The guests of honor were Marcus's boss, a man named Mr. Sterling, and his wife. Marcus had been talking about this dinner for a month because a potential promotion was on the line, and move into the executive ranks that he coveted more than anything. The entire house was transformed. Caterers moved silently through the kitchen. Ania had hired a professional florist to arrange elaborate bouquets of white lilies and orchids, and the air hummed with a nervous tension that was almost electric. Nia was the source of most of it. She moved through the house like a general before a battle, inspecting every polished wine glass and straightened silver fork. Her voice was a sharp, clipped instrument as she directed the staff. She had bought a new dress for the occasion, a sleek black sheath that probably cost more than my first car. She looked me up and down as I came into the living room, her eyes lingering on the simple button-down shirt and slacks I was wearing. "Is that what you're wearing, Isaiah?" she asked, her smile a little too bright. "It is nice and very comfortable." The unspoken criticism hung in the air between us. Marcus was a nervous wreck. He followed in Nia's wake like a loyal lieutenant trying to anticipate her every command. He straightened pictures that were already straight and fussed with the wine decanter, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was performing the role of the successful young professional, and the pressure of the performance was making him sweat. About 30 minutes before the guests were scheduled to arrive, they both sat me down in the living room. It was an ambush disguised as a casual chat. "Dad, we are so glad you can join us tonight," Marcus began, his voice strained. "This is a very important evening for me and for us." Nia took over, her tone softer but with an edge of steel. "We just want to make sure the evening goes smoothly. Mr. Sterling is a little old-fashioned. He appreciates a certain kind of conversation. It would be best if you let Marcus lead the discussion, okay? And maybe we can save the stories about your old construction days for another time. They can be a bit much for some people." I sat there and just nodded. I was a child being given instructions on how to behave at the grown-up table. I was a potential embarrassment and a liability that needed to be managed. When the Sterlings arrived, I was polite. I shook Mr. Sterling's hand, and he was a tall man with cold eyes who gave me a brief dismissive smile before turning all of his attention to Marcus. His wife gave a limp handshake and immediately began complimenting Nia on the house. I quickly became part of the background furniture. The conversation over appetizers was a language I did not speak. They talked about market caps and quarterly earnings and disruptive technologies. They discussed upcoming ski trips to Aspen and summer vacations in Tuscany. I sat silently nursing a glass of water, feeling like a ghost at my own son's table. This was the world I'd given him, the life I had worked for him to have, a life of comfort and privilege, far from the dirt and sweat of my own past. I should have felt proud, but instead all I felt was a profound and aching distance. I looked at my son laughing at one of Mr. Sterling's jokes, his face animated with ambition, and I did not see the boy I'd raised. I saw a performer and a stranger. And as the caterers began to bring out the main course, a beautiful platter of slow-cooked barbecue ribs, I felt a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was a hunger to be seen and to be acknowledged as more than just a silent old man in a comfortable shirt. The main course was served on pristine white plates by a silent catering staff. It was slow-cooked barbecue ribs with a side of garlic, mashed potatoes, and collard greens. The aroma was intoxicating, a rich, smoky sweetness that made my stomach ache with genuine hunger. A plate was placed in front of me. On it were 2 small ribs, maybe 4 inches long, each a single elegant scoop of potatoes and a small tidy bundle of greens. It was a beautiful plate, but it was also a child's portion. I looked around the table. Marcus's plate was piled high with at least half a rack of ribs. Mr. Sterling had a similar serving. Everyone was eating with enthusiasm, talking and laughing as they enjoyed the feast. I ate my 2 ribs slowly. They were delicious, tender, and falling off the bone. They were gone in less than 5 minutes. The hunger in my stomach was no longer a dull ache, it was a sharp, insistent pang. But it was more than physical hunger now. A slow, burning indignation was rising within me. I was not a guest who needed to be polite. I was not a child who needed his food monitored. I was the man who had paid for this entire spectacle, though no one at the table seemed to remember that. I was a 68-year-old man in a house of plenty, and I was still hungry. I looked at the center of the table. A large silver platter gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier. It was still laden with ribs. There were dozens of them piled high, a testament to the abundance Nia wanted to project. The irony was suffocating. I watched Marcus as he laughed at a story his boss was telling. I watched Nia gracefully sip her wine, playing the part of the perfect hostess. They were so absorbed in their performance, so confident in the world they had constructed for themselves, a world where I was a silent prop. In that moment, a quiet resolve settled over me. I was not going to be invisible anymore. I was not going to accept the portion they had assigned to me in their budget or at their dinner table. I was done being managed. I waited for a brief pause in the conversation when Mr. Sterling was taking a drink of his wine. I did not raise my voice. I didn't sound demanding or angry. My tone was calm, level, and conversational. "Marcus," I said. His head turned toward me, a look of mild surprise on his face. "The ribs are absolutely delicious, and yet you have outdone yourselves." Then I looked back at my son and made my simple, reasonable request. "Would you mind passing the platter? I would love to have just one more piece." The words hung in the air. The low hum of conversation at the table did not just quiet down, it stopped. It was as if I had pulled the plug on a stereo. Marcus froze his fork halfway to his mouth. Naya's painted smile became a thin, tight line. Even Mr. Sterling stopped chewing and looked from me to Marcus, his eyes filled with a detached curiosity. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint clinking of ice in a water glass. The silence was my answer. Marcus's face, which had been animated and cheerful just moments before, began to flush with a deep, ugly red. It started at his collar and crept up his neck, a rising tide of anger and embarrassment. He shot a quick, panicked look at his boss, then at Nia. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a clear command to shut me down immediately. Marcus cleared his throat and forced a tight, artificial laugh. "Dad, come on now." He said, his voice a little too loud. "You have had plenty to eat. We need to watch your health, remember. Doctor's orders." He was trying to frame his disrespect as concern, a tactic he had used before. He was painting me as a doddering old man who did not know what was good for him. All eyes at the table were now on me. I could feel their collective gaze, a mixture of pity and uncomfortable curiosity. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice. I met my son's gaze with a calm and steady look. "I appreciate your concern for my health, son, I truly do." I said, my voice even and measured. "But I feel perfectly fine. The doctor said to be mindful of what I eat, not to starve myself. There is plenty of food left on that platter. I am simply asking for one more piece." My calmness seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. I was not playing the part of the confused old father. I was being a rational adult, and it was making his refusal look absurd and controlling. Nia saw Marcus faltering and quickly jumped in to rescue him. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Isaiah, Marcus is just thinking of you," she cooed. "Besides, we have a wonderful chocolate lava cake coming out for dessert. It is to die for. You should really save some room for that." She was trying to distract and dismiss me, to treat my request like a child's tantrum that could be soothed with the promise of a sweet treat. I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on Marcus. He was the one who needed to answer. He was the head of this table, or so he wanted everyone to believe. "Marcus," I said again, my voice softer now, but with an unyielding firmness. "The platter, please." It was a direct challenge to his authority in front of the one man he desperately wanted to impress. He was trapped, and the pressure was causing his composure to crack. His forced smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. I said, "That is enough, Dad." His voice was a low growl, now stripped of all pretense. "Now let us just drop it. You are making a scene. Making a scene." The accusation was a slap in the face. I was the one being denied a basic courtesy, yet I was the one being accused of causing a disturbance. I looked at the other guests. Mrs. Sterling was staring intently at her mashed potatoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. Her husband, though, was watching the exchange with a keen analytical interest. He was not just a guest, he was a judge, and my son was failing the test. I knew I had pushed him as far as he could go. I had one final thing to say. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of years of disappointment. "Son, all I asked for was a piece of food in a house that you know is full of it. I am not the one making a scene here. I am simply asking for the same small courtesy you would show to any other guest at this table, nothing more." My words were calm, and they were true, and the truth of them was more than he could bear. My final words hung in the air as a simple and undeniable truth. And for a man like my son, who had built his life on a foundation of performance and image, the truth was an intolerable assault. I saw something snap behind his eyes. The performative anger, the embarrassment, the frustration, it all melted away and was replaced by a pure blank white-hot rage. His face lost all its color. His knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. He did not look at me. He looked at the heavy crystal glass of ice water sitting next to his plate. I watched him in what felt like slow motion. I saw the decision being made. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. His hand released the fork and moved with a terrifying deliberation toward the glass. Condensation dripped from its sides onto the white tablecloth. His fingers wrapped around it, his hand trembling, not with hesitation, but with fury. He raised it. For a split second, I thought he was just going to take a drink to calm himself. It was a foolish, hopeful thought. Then, with a guttural sound that was more animal than human, he lunged forward and threw the entire contents of the glass into my face. The shock was absolute. It was not just the cold, which was a violent jolt that stole the breath from my lungs. It was the impact of the ice cube striking my cheek and my forehead like a spray of frozen gravel. Water flooded my eyes, blurring the scene in front of me. It poured down my nose and into my mouth, tasting of nothing. It ran down my chin, down my neck, soaking the collar of my shirt and spreading a cold, damp stain across my chest. For a moment, I could not move. I could not breathe. I could not think. I just sat there dripping stunned into a state of suspended animation. The world came back into focus with a loud thud as Marcus slammed the empty glass back down on the table. And then there was silence. A silence so complete, so profound, it felt like the entire world had gone dead. It was a vacuum where the polite dinner party chatter used to be. I blinked the water from my eyes and the scene clarified into a horrifying tableau. Marcus was standing now, his chest heaving, as if he had just run a marathon. His face was a mask of disbelief, as if he could not quite comprehend what he had just done. Across from him, Naya had both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock for the first time that night. Mrs. Sterling let out a small strangled gasp. Her husband, Mr. Sterling, was perfectly still. His face was no longer curious or amused. It was a mask of cold contempt. He was looking at my son not as a promising employee, but as a liability, a man with a fatal character flaw. In that moment, I knew my son's promotion was gone forever. The humiliation washed over me, a wave of heat that fought against the cold water still clinging to my skin. I was a 68-year-old man being punished like a disobedient child by my own son in front of strangers. The dripping water felt like tears that my pride would not let me shed. The shock and the shame were a physical weight. But then as the seconds stretched on, something else began to rise through the icy depths. It was not anger, not the hot, blinding rage that had possessed my son. It was something colder, something harder. It was clarity, a perfect and terrible clarity. The loving father in me, The man who had excused his son's changing behavior, the man who held on to the memory of the boy he had raised, died in that chair. In his place, a different man was born, a man who saw the world not through the soft filter of paternal love, but through the sharp lens of reality. My son had not just thrown water at me, he had made a statement. He had declared that I was worthless to him, that my feelings, my dignity, my very presence were an inconvenience to be violently swept aside when they interfered with his ambitions. He had shown me exactly who he was, and in that cold, clear moment of understanding, I decided to believe him. The path forward was no longer about seeking his love or his respect. That was a fool's errand. The path forward was about justice. It was about rebalancing the scales. All the assets, all the legal structures, all the financial power I had retained. It all came into focus not as a safety net for my old age, but as an arsenal. The war had been declared, and I had just been handed my weapons. The pain in my chest solidified from a raw emotional wound into a cold, hard stone of purpose. I slowly and deliberately reached for the white cloth napkin next to my plate. I did not rush. Every movement was calm and measured. I unfolded it and began to wipe the water from my face, from my eyes, my cheeks, my chin. I did not look at my son. I did not look at anyone. When my face was dry, I folded the napkin, placed it gently on the table, stood up, pushed my chair silently back into place, turned around and walked out of the dining room without a single word. I left them all to sit there in the deafening silence of what they had done. I walked out of the dining room with my back straight and my head held high. I did not slam any doors. I did not make a sound. Each step I took on the plush runner in the hallway was deliberate. A silent retreat from a battle I had no intention of fighting on their terms. Behind me, I heard the eruption of panicked whispers, the frantic scraping of chairs, the hurried and awkward goodbyes of the Sterlings. The dinner party was over. The performance had ended in disaster. I did not look back. I continued down the hall to my wing of the house, opened the door to my suite, and closed it softly behind me. And then I did something I had not done in the entire 2 years I had lived there. I turned the deadbolt. The heavy click of the lock sliding into place was the loudest sound in the world. It was a sound of finality, a line being drawn, a chapter being closed. This was no longer a part of their house where I happened to live. It was my fortress, and the siege was about to begin. I sat in the darkness of my sitting room and I listened. I heard the front door open and close, signaling the hasty departure of the Sterlings. Then I heard footsteps approaching my door, quick and hesitant. A soft knock. "Dad." It was Marcus's voice, muffled by the thick wood. "Dad, are you okay? Can you please open the door?" I remained silent. "I just want to talk. I am sorry." "Okay, I'm so sorry. I do not know what happened back there. I was just under a lot of pressure. Mr. Sterling was there, and you were pushing me." His apology was a pathetic cascade of excuses, a symphony of self-pity. He was not sorry for what he did. He was sorry that he had revealed his ugly true self in front of his boss. He was sorry for the consequences he would now inevitably face. His regret was entirely for himself. His words meant nothing to me. They were just noise. After a few moments of my continued silence, I heard Nia's sharp whisper, "Marcus, that is enough. Just leave him be." Then her voice replaced his at the door, dripping with a false saccharine sweetness that was more insulting than Marcus's rage. "Isaiah, it is Nia. We are both very worried about you. Marcus is just beside himself with guilt. Please do not be upset. We are all just very stressed. Why do not you come out and have a glass of wine with us? We can talk this all through." Her offer was absurd. She spoke as if this were a minor disagreement, a simple misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a drink. They did not understand the magnitude of what had just happened. They could not. Another knock this time, a little more insistent. "Isaiah, please." I held my breath and remained perfectly still. Finally, I heard them give up. I heard their footsteps retreat down the hallway. I could picture the scene perfectly. They would go to the living room, pour themselves a stiff drink, and dissect the evening's catastrophe. They would tell themselves that I was being overly sensitive, that I was an old man having an emotional outburst. Just give him some space, they would say to each other. He will have forgotten all about it by morning. They imagined me in my room weeping or raging or simply staring at a wall in a state of senile confusion. They thought my silence was the silence of a victim. They had no idea it was the silence of a predator. Once the house fell quiet, I did not weep. I did not feel the need to pace the room in anger. I simply sat in my armchair and breathed. I let the last remnants of that fiery public humiliation burn away. I let the hurt and the shock recede like a tide going out to sea. And what was left on the shore was not sadness. It was a cold, calm, and unshakable purpose. After several minutes of quiet contemplation, I stood up. I walked across the room and turned on a single small desk lamp. It cast a pool of focused yellow light on my large oak desk, illuminating the work ahead. I ignored the bed. Sleep was an indulgence I could not afford tonight. Instead, I walked over to a handsome, built-in bookcase that lined one of the walls. To the casual observer, it looked like a simple piece of furniture filled with old engineering textbooks and classic novels. But I knew its secret. I reached in and pressed a nearly invisible section of the woodwork, and a panel swung silently inward, revealing the cool gray steel of a digital safe. Marcus and Naya did not even know it existed. They saw me as a simple man, a relic from a bygone era who did not understand the complexities of the modern world. They had no idea how meticulously my dear Ruby and I had planned for the future. I entered the code, a sequence of numbers that represented Ruby's birthday. The heavy steel door swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or flashy jewelry. There were files, dozens of them, all perfectly organized in labeled folders, deeds to properties, stock portfolios, bank account statements, insurance policies, and right in the center was a thick, dark blue leather portfolio with gold lettering on the spine reading, "The Ruby Family Trust." I lifted the portfolio from the safe. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of responsibility and the power it contained. I carried it over to the desk and sat down. I opened it and spread the documents across the polished wood under the lamplight. I did not feel a single pang of nostalgia or sadness. I felt like a general unrolling his battle maps before a decisive engagement. Every document, every clause, every signature was a weapon in my arsenal. I turned on my laptop, its quiet hum joining the ticking of the clock on my mantelpiece. Marcus had never once asked about the specifics of the family finances. He had accepted the expensive education, the down payment on this very house, the seed money for his first car, all of it as his birthright. His entitlement had made him ignorant. His privilege had made him blind. He had no idea that his entire luxurious lifestyle was not built on his own salary, but was propped up by the careful and complex financial structures his mother and I had spent a lifetime building. He thought he was the master of his own universe. He was about to learn he was merely a tenant, and his lease had just expired. I was not a broken old man nursing a wounded pride. I was an engineer reviewing a faulty structure, and I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were, and I knew exactly how to bring the whole thing down. I picked up my phone, looked up a number in my contacts, and made my first call. The voice that answered was old and familiar. The voice of my lawyer and my friend of 40 years. Jeremiah. I said, my voice low and steady. It is Isaiah. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help. Something has happened. We need to set a few things in motion. Under the focused beam of the desk lamp, the documents in the blue leather portfolio seemed to come alive. These were not just papers. They were the blueprints of my life with Ruby, the architecture of the future we had so carefully designed together. I ran my fingers over the first page, a heavy cream-colored stock with the words, "The Ruby Family Trust," embossed at the top. The lawyer we had hired had been the best, a sharp old man with a reputation for creating ironclad legal structures. I remembered the day Ruby and I sat in his mahogany-paneled office 25 years ago. Marcus had just graduated from college full of ambition and a sense of entitlement that already worried his mother. Ruby had been the driving force behind the trust. I was a builder, a man who understood concrete and steel. She was the architect of our family's future. I remember her turning to me in that office, her expression serious. Isaiah, she had said, we have worked hard. We have been blessed. We're going to give our son a wonderful start in life, but we are not going to give him a blank check. We have to give him a roadmap, not just a destination. He needs to understand that this family is built on respect and hard work, not just money. I had trusted her judgment implicitly, and now looking at the words on the page, I saw her wisdom, her incredible foresight, staring back at me across the years. The trust was her masterpiece, and I was its sole caretaker. I flipped through the pages. Our signatures were on every one, bold and straightforward. Hers, a graceful, elegant script. It was a revocable living trust, a complex instrument designed to protect our assets and provide for our family for generations. But it was not a simple inheritance. It was a system of checks and balances, a moral compass written in legal language. I paused at the section titled Trustees and Beneficiaries. As I read the carefully crafted paragraphs, the full extent of the power I held began to dawn on me. I was listed as the grantor and the primary trustee. Ruby had been the co-trustee. Upon the death of one trustee, the document stated the surviving trustee shall assume full and singular authority over all trust assets and decisions. Full and singular authority. The words echoed in the silent room. Marcus was named as the primary beneficiary, but his status was conditional. He was entitled to receive income and support from the trust at the discretion of the trustee. At the discretion of the trustee, the phrase was a hammer blow. Nia was listed as a secondary beneficiary. Her status entirely dependent on her continued marriage to Marcus. She had no independent claim on anything. And then I found it. The clause that Ruby had insisted upon over the objections of our lawyer, who called it unconventional. She had called it the Family Integrity and Conduct Clause. It was her brilliant stroke of genius, her fail-safe against the very poison that had now infected my son. The clause was long and dense with legalese, but its meaning was brutally clear. It stated that if any beneficiary engaged in behavior deemed detrimental to the reputation of the family name or acted in a manner that demonstrated a gross lack of respect, care, or filial piety toward another immediate family member, the trustee had the unilateral right to take action. The actions were laid out in a numbered list. A, temporarily suspend all financial distributions. B, restrict access to trust-owned properties. C, in extreme cases, permanently disinherit the beneficiary and reassign their portion of the trust to other beneficiaries or to a designated charity. Gross lack of respect. Filial piety. Hitting your 68-year-old father in the face with a glass of ice water in front of your boss because he asked for another rib certainly qualified. I leaned back in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. This was not just a legal document, it was a prophecy. Ruby had seen this coming. She had seen the potential for wealth to corrupt, for entitlement to rot the core of the boy we had raised. She had built a firewall into the very foundations of our family to protect it from this exact kind of moral bankruptcy. I continued reading, my eyes scanning the asset schedules attached at the back, and the true scale of Marcus's ignorance was laid bare. This house, the one he and Nia so proudly showed off to their friends, was not legally theirs. The deed was held by the Ruby Family Trust. The sprawling stock portfolio that paid for their vacations and their luxury cars was not in their names. It was a trust asset. The joint bank account they used for their daily expenses was not truly theirs either. It was a discretionary distribution account funded on a monthly basis directly from the trust. They were not homeowners, they were tenants, they were not investors, they were allowances. They were living a life they thought they owned, but in reality they were just borrowing it. And I was the landlord. I was the banker. I was the man who could, with a few phone calls and a few signatures, turn off the gilded tap from which their entire privileged world flowed. A wave of profound sadness washed over me for what my son had become. He had traded the genuine wealth of family and respect for the cheap illusion of material success. But sadness was a luxury, and it was quickly replaced by a cold, resolute certainty. My son's act of public humiliation was not just an insult to me. It was a violation of the very principles upon which his entire life was built. It was a betrayal of his mother's legacy. My duty was clear. I was not acting out of a desire for revenge, though a grim satisfaction was beginning to bloom in my chest. I was acting as the trustee of Ruby's will. I was enforcing the terms and conditions of her love. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Marcus. "Dad, please just talk to me. We can fix this." I looked at the message, and a bitter smile touched my lips. He still thought this was about a family argument. He still thought this could be fixed with a few hollow words of apology. He had no idea he was standing in a house that was about to be demolished. I put the phone down without replying. My work was not finished yet. The trust was my primary weapon, but I had one more in my arsenal, an ace in the hole. A personal promise made between two old friends. I pulled another file from the safe, a much thinner one containing a single contract, and I prepared to make my second call of the night. The trust was the legal foundation of my plan, but the second document I pulled from the safe was the emotional cornerstone. It was a simple manila folder labeled with a single word, Nexus. Inside was a contract, a seed investment agreement dated 15 years ago. It was for $250,000, a sum that represented a significant portion of my life savings at the time. The investment was in a fledgling tech startup called Nexus Solutions, founded by an old friend of mine, Otis Vance. I remember the day I signed it as if it were yesterday. Marcus had been out of college for a year. He had a prestigious marketing degree, but the job market was tough. He was growing frustrated and despondent, working an unpaid internship that was going nowhere. He felt like a failure. Every evening he would come home looking defeated, the ambition and confidence the university had instilled in him slowly eroding away. It was painful to watch. Around that time, Otis had reached out to me. We had known each other since we were young men working on the same construction sites. I was a structural engineer, and he was an electrical genius. We had always respected each other's work ethic. Now Otis had started his own company, a brilliant idea for a new kind of software, but he was struggling. He was a creator, not a businessman. He was on the verge of losing everything. He had called me not to ask for money, but just to talk to an old friend, to vent his frustrations. We met for a beer in a quiet old bar we used to frequent. He laid out his business plan, his vision. It was impressive, but he could not secure the funding he needed to hire a proper sales and marketing team. Without them, his brilliant product was going to die on the vine. As I listened to him, an idea began to form in my mind, a solution that could solve both of our problems. "I have some money saved up, Otis," I said to him after he had finished. "It is a risk for me, but I believe in you. I will give you the $250,000 you need." Otis had been stunned into silence. Then tears had welled up in his eyes. He tried to refuse to say it was too much, but I stopped him. "There's a condition." I continued, my voice steady, a non-negotiable one. "My son Marcus, he has a degree in marketing. He is smart and he is ambitious, but he needs a chance. You will hire him. You will create a position for him as a junior marketing associate. You will mentor him. You will give him the opportunity to prove himself. And I need your word on one more thing, Otis. This is not just business. This is family. If he ever gets into real trouble, if he ever loses his way, I need to know that I can call you and you will listen. Not as a CEO to an investor, but as a friend to a friend. We will handle it together." Otis had grabbed my hand across the table, his grip firm and his eyes filled with a profound gratitude. "Isaiah," he had said, his voice thick with emotion, "anything. You are not just saving my company, you are saving my family. Consider it done." We had a lawyer draw up the investment papers, but our real contract was sealed with that handshake. Marcus was overjoyed when I told him. I did not tell him the full story, of course. I told him my old friend Otis had an opening and that I had put in a good word for him. Marcus got the job, and to his credit, he thrived. He was good at it. He was a natural marketer. He climbed the ladder at Nexus Solutions with impressive speed. Over the years, I think he forgot that his start had been a gift. He convinced himself that he had earned that first opportunity entirely on his own merits. He saw himself as a self-made man just like his father. He had no idea that the foundation of his entire career was a secret deal made in a dusty old bar, a deal born from a father's love and an old friend's desperation. He thought he was indispensable to the company. He had no clue that his employment was conditional, not on his performance, but on a promise made between two old men. This contract, this memory, it was my ace in the hole. The trust would take away his wealth and his home. But this would take away his pride. It would shatter the central myth of his life, the story he told himself about his own success. It was a cruel thing to do, but I knew it was necessary. To rebuild a man, you first have to tear down the false idol he worships. And my son worshipped at the altar of his own accomplishments. It was time to show him that the altar itself was built on sand. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Otis Vance. I took a deep breath. This was the final piece of the plan. This was the call that would complete the demolition. I pressed the button. I sat at my desk for a long moment, the two crucial documents lying before me like a declaration of war. The house was completely silent. Marcus and Nia were likely asleep, dreaming their untroubled dreams in a home they did not own, supported by a career they did not truly earn. The time for deliberation was over. The time for action had arrived. I picked up my phone and made the first call. It was to Jeremiah, my lawyer, and a man I had trusted for over 40 years. He picked up on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Isaiah, is that you? Is everything okay?" He asked, his professionalism immediately kicking in. "Everything is about to be, Jeremiah," I said. My voice was calm and steady, a perfect mirror of the quiet resolve in my heart. "I am sorry for the late hour, but I need you to initiate a few things first thing in the morning. I need you to freeze all discretionary distributions from the Ruby Family Trust to its beneficiaries. Effective immediately." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of sheets as he likely sat up in bed. "Isaiah, that is a significant move. Are you absolutely certain?" "I have never been more certain in my life, Jeremiah," I replied. "Refer to the Family Integrity and Conduct Clause, Section 4, Subsection B. The conditions for this action have been met in full. Secondly, I need you to prepare the legal notices for an eviction at the property located at 125 Elm Street. The trust is liquidating the asset." The silence on the other end was longer this time. I knew what he was thinking. This was not just a financial decision. It was a familial earthquake. "Understood, Isaiah." He finally said, his voice now. "All business. I will have my team start on it at 9 in the morning sharp. I will need a formal statement from you. We can handle that tomorrow." "Thank you, Jeremiah," I said, and ended the call. The first pillar of their world was set to crumble. I did not hesitate. I immediately dialed the second number. It was the personal cell phone of Otis Vance, the founder and CEO of Nexus Solutions. He answered almost immediately, his voice alert and energetic, even at this late hour. "Isaiah," he said with genuine surprise, "it is good to hear your voice, but I have a feeling this is not a social call." "You always were sharp, Otis," I replied. "I am calling about a promise we made a long time ago. The one we made in a bar over a handshake." The line went quiet. I knew Otis was traveling back in time with me to that dusty old tavern when his dreams were on the verge of collapse and my son's future was uncertain. I remember it. "Like it was yesterday, Isaiah," he said, his voice now softer, more serious. "You saved me that day. I'm calling in the favor, Otis. I said my son has lost his way. He has forgotten the value of respect, the foundation upon which everything else is built. It is time for him to learn a lesson that only a hard fall can teach." There was no hesitation in Otis's voice. "What do you need me to do, Isaiah?" "You know I will do anything." His position at Nexus. "It needs to be terminated. I want you to let him go. Call it a corporate restructuring, whatever you need to. But his time with your company is over." Otis sighed, a heavy sound of regret, but not of refusal. "Isaiah, he is a top performer. Are you sure this is what you want?" "He is a good employee," Otis, I replied, "but he is no longer a good man, and our deal was about family." "I am sure. All right, Isaiah, for you. It is done. I will handle it personally in the morning." "Thank you, my friend," I said. "No, Isaiah." Otis's voice was firm. "Thank you. The debt was always mine." I ended the call and placed the phone back on the desk. The two calls had taken less than 5 minutes. In that short time, I had signed the demolition order for my son's entire life. I felt no joy, no triumph, only a grim and profound finality. The wheels were in motion. There was no turning back now. For the first time since that glass of water hit my face, I felt a sense of peace. I stood up, turned off the desk lamp, and went to bed. I knew that when the sun rose, the world would be a very different place, and I would sleep soundly, knowing I had finally done what had to be done. I woke up the next morning to the first real silence I had experienced in that house. It was not the tense, awkward silence of the past few weeks. It was a silence of completion of peace. I did not leave my suite. I had a small coffee maker and a mini fridge in my sitting area. I made a pot of strong black coffee just the way Ruby used to like it and sat in my armchair watching the sun climb into the sky. I did not feel anxious or vengeful. I felt calm. I had set the gears of a great machine in motion.
Now all I had to do was wait and listen for the sound of it grinding to life. The first sounds of panic began around 11 in the morning. I knew Nia's schedule. Tuesday was her day for what she called retail therapy. It was her way of rewarding herself for the hardship of living such a privileged life. I could picture the scene as if I were watching it on a screen. I saw her in one of those exclusive boutiques at Phipps Plaza, the kind where the price tags are hidden and the air smells of expensive leather and French perfume. She would have selected a new handbag, something absurdly priced, and placed it on the counter with a practiced air of casual ownership. She would hand over her platinum credit card without a second thought. And then the first gear would engage. The polite smile on the sales assistant's face would falter. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Ramsey. The card has been declined." Naya's first reaction would be disbelief, followed by irritation. "That is impossible," she would snap. Run it again. The assistant would obey, and the result would be the same. Declined. The irritation would then curdle into a hot flash of public humiliation. I could see her fumbling in her designer wallet for a different card, an American Express or a Visa. Each one handed over with diminishing confidence. Each one met with the same quiet, apologetic denial. Declined. 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 I imagined her leaving the store empty, handed her face a mask of fury. The judgment of the other wealthy patrons would feel like a physical weight on her shoulders. She would have stormed out and driven home at a dangerous speed. The sound of the front door slamming told me my calculations were correct. I heard her shouting for Marcus, her voice high and shrill. "Marcus, what is going on? Every single one of my credit cards was just declined. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" Marcus's voice was muffled at first, annoyed and dismissive. "Relax, Nia. It is probably just a technical issue."
Call the bank. I did call the bank, you idiot, she shrieked. They said the primary account holder has frozen all activity. They said to speak to you. Did you not pay the bill, Marcus? Did you mess something up? The accusation hung in the air. I heard the scraping of a chair as Marcus likely got up from his home office desk, annoyed at being interrupted. Let me see. He would have said with a sigh, opening his laptop to log into their main bank account. This was the moment the second, much larger gear would fall into place. I could hear their angry murmurs from down the hall, and then a sudden and complete silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had woken up to. This one was filled with shock and disbelief. After a long moment, I heard Marcus's voice, a choked whisper. "The money. Nia, the money is gone." Naya's response was a sharp, confused laugh. "What do you mean gone? Stop joking around, Marcus. This is not funny." "It is gone," he repeated, his voice rising in panic. "The savings account and the checking account. It is all empty. There is barely $1,000 left." I could hear Nia rushing over to the laptop. I heard a small gasp. "What happened?" she stammered. "Where did it go? Did we get hacked? Were we robbed?" They would have started blaming each other, their unified front crumbling at the first sign of real trouble. "You and your ridiculous spending," he would accuse. "You and your stupid stock market tips," she would fire back. And then in the middle of their frantic, panicked argument, the final gear would click into place in my son's mind. A horrifying realization. Wait a minute. I heard him say, his voice suddenly low and cold. "My father." This has to be him. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The machine was now fully operational, and the noise was just beginning. I did not have to wait long. I heard them before I saw them. The sound of furious footsteps pounding down the hallway, a frantic two-person stampede. The door to my suite was not opened. It was thrown open, crashing against the interior wall with a sound that cracked the morning silence. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face pale and blotchy with rage. His hair was a mess, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. He was still in his expensive pajamas, but he looked like a cornered animal, not a successful executive. Naya hovered behind him, her face a mask of pure panic. "What did you do?" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and fear. "What did you do with our money? How could you?" He was treating me like a common thief who had broken into his house, not a father who had built it. I did not rise from my chair. I did not flinch. I was dressed in a freshly pressed gray suit with a crisp white shirt and a simple dark blue tie. On the desk in front of me, the leather portfolio containing the trust documents lay open. I looked at my hysterical son, and I felt nothing but a profound and distant pity.
I gestured to the empty armchair opposite my desk. "Close the door. Marcus, and please sit down. Nia, you should sit as well. This is a conversation you both need to hear." My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. "Sit down," he scoffed. "I do not want to sit down. I want you to put the money back right now. That is our life savings. That is where your first and most fundamental mistake lies." "Son," I said, my voice was quiet, unemotional, the voice of a man stating a simple fact. It was never your money. It was never your savings. Marcus just stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. He shook his head in disbelief. "What are you talking about, a trust? That is insane. I earned that money. That is my salary, from Nexus, my bonuses, my stock options. I worked for that." "Yes, you worked," I acknowledged with a slight nod. "You have a job. You earn a salary."
"But you seem to be confused about what happens to that salary after it is earned. You see, when your mother and I were planning our future, we decided to create a legal structure to protect the family's assets. It is called the Ruby Family Trust. It was designed to provide for you and your future family while ensuring that the wealth we built was managed responsibly. It was a gift, Marcus, a safety net. You were so busy enjoying the gift that you never bothered to read the instructions that came with it." I gestured to the papers on my desk. "This trust is the legal owner of most of the assets you consider yours. This house, for example, the deed is in the name of the trust. The vast investment portfolio that generates the income you live so comfortably on is a trust asset. Even the primary bank account that your salary is deposited into is a trust-owned account. You have been living on a very generous and very well-managed allowance, Marcus, an allowance that you mistakenly believed was an accomplishment." His face had gone from red with anger to a ghostly white. He finally sank into the chair, his legs seeming to give out from under him. Naya just stared at me, her carefully constructed world dissolving before her eyes. "But this is not possible," Marcus stammered. "I signed the checks. I moved the money. You have access." I corrected him gently. "You were granted access by the trustee. Your mother and I were co-trustees. Now I am the sole trustee. The trust gives me full and singular authority over all its assets and all distributions. You were never in control, Marcus. You just had the illusion of control. And now we come to the reason for our current situation. Your mother was a very wise woman. She worried that great wealth without strong values could become a poison. So she insisted that our lawyer include a special section. She called it the Family Integrity and Conduct Clause. I picked up the relevant page, holding it so he could see the official letterhead. I'm going to read a portion of it to you now. If any beneficiary engages in behavior deemed detrimental to the reputation of the family name or acts in a manner that demonstrates a gross lack of respect, care, or filial piety toward another immediate family member, the trustee shall have the unilateral right to take corrective action, including, but not limited to, the immediate suspension of all financial distributions. I put the paper down and looked directly into my son's eyes. When you threw that glass of water in my face last night, Marcus, you did more than just insult an old man. You violated the core principle of the legal document that governs your entire financial existence. You triggered the clause. As the sole trustee, I'm not just entitled. I am obligated by the terms your mother and I created to take action. So I have. All discretionary distributions have been suspended. The credit cards have been frozen. The accounts have been secured. As of 9 o'clock this morning, your allowance has been cut off. He said nothing. He could not. The rage had been extinguished, replaced by the dawning horror of the truth. He had not been fighting with his father. He had been fighting with the law, and he had lost. I closed the portfolio with a soft, final thud. "This is not a punishment, son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It is a consequence. This is not about my wounded feelings. It is about the rules you never bothered to learn." Marcus stared at me, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. He tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. He looked like a man who had been told the sky was green his entire life and was only now being forced to look up. Nia was the first to find her voice, though it was a thin, trembling whisper. "This is not possible. Our names are on the mortgage. We signed the papers." I almost smiled at her naivety. "You signed residency papers, Nia," I said, my voice still maddeningly calm. "You signed an agreement to live in and maintain a property owned by the trust. You were given the responsibility of paying the property taxes and upkeep from the funds distributed to you by the trust. It was a very effective way to teach you financial responsibility. Or so your mother and I had hoped." Marcus finally found his voice a roar of desperation. "I will not let you do this. This is a scare tactic. We will get a lawyer. We will fight this in court. You cannot just steal everything we have worked for." As the last word left his mouth, a sound echoed through the house. The clear, polite chime of the front doorbell. The timing was so perfect it was almost poetic. They both jumped at the sound, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. I, however, did not move. I simply looked at my son. "You should probably answer that, Marcus," I said. "It is for you." He looked at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then he turned and stormed out of my study with Nia trailing nervously behind him. I did not need to see what was happening. I had planned it. I could hear the scene unfolding from down the hall. I heard Marcus wrench the front door open. I heard a man's formal professional voice. "Are you Marcus Ramsey?" A moment of silence, then Marcus's confused reply. "Yes, I am." "I am an officer of the court, sir." The man's voice continued. "I am here to serve you with a legal notice." I heard the rustle of an envelope being handed over. I pictured the confusion on my son's face turning to anger as he tore it open and read the first few lines. Then I heard the front door slam shut. A moment later, Marcus was back in the doorway of my study. He was waving the official-looking document in his hand, a single piece of paper that had just shattered the second pillar of his world. His face was no longer just angry, it was contorted with a wild, panicked fury. "What is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "What in the hell is this?" "It is an eviction notice." "An eviction notice? It says we have 30 days to vacate the premises." 30 days? Is this your idea of some sick, twisted joke? I looked at the trembling paper in his hand and then back at his face. "It is not a joke, Marcus," I said. "It is a legal formality. It is the logical next step." He just stared at me, uncomprehending. "As I just finished explaining to you both, the Ruby Family Trust is the legal owner of this property. Your name is not on the deed. Your wife's name is not on the deed. You were never the owners. You were simply residents living here under the terms of the trust agreement you signed, but never bothered to read. As the sole trustee, I have what is called a fiduciary duty. That means I have a legal and ethical obligation to manage the trust's assets responsibly. Given your recent conduct, which was a clear violation of the trust integrity clause, allowing you to continue living in the trust's most valuable physical asset would be a dereliction of that duty. Therefore, the trust is exercising its right to sell the property." His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked from me to Nia, who had her hand pressed against her chest as if to keep her heart from beating out of it. I delivered the final lines with a cold surgical precision. You are not being kicked out of your home, Marcus. You are being formally asked to leave a property that was never yours to begin with. The law requires a 30-day notice period, which I have made sure to provide. I believe that is more than fair. You should probably discuss your options with your lawyer. I paused for a beat. Oh, wait. That is right. You will need money to hire one, won't you? The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. The fight drained out of him, completely replaced by the hollow, vacant look of utter defeat. In the span of less than 15 minutes, he had lost his fortune and his home, and he was finally beginning to understand that this was only the beginning. Marcus stood there holding the eviction notice as if it were a venomous snake, his hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. He looked utterly broken, a man hollowed out from the inside. Nietzsche was leaning against the door frame, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The silence in the room was thick with the weight of their shattered reality. Just when I thought the silence could not get any deeper, sound cut through it, the cheerful electronic ringtone of Marcus's cell phone. It was an obscene noise in the funereal atmosphere of the room, and he fumbled in the pocket of his pajamas, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. And he looked at the screen, a flicker of confusion on his face. "It is Otis Vance," he whispered, as if the name itself was a strange and foreign object. He answered the call, his voice a weak and trembling hello. I watched him as he listened. I saw the last vestiges of color drain from his face, leaving it a waxy gray. I saw his eyes widen in disbelief, and then in a final crushing understanding. His side of the conversation was short, consisting of only a few choked monosyllables. What he stammered. "What do you mean? The entire department is being restructured. But I am the top marketing director. My performance reviews. No, I understand. Yes, sir. Goodbye." He lowered the phone from his ear, his arm dropping to his side as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He did not seem to be breathing. "That was Otis," he said to the empty air, his voice a dead monotone. "The company is downsizing. They have eliminated my position. My job is gone." He slowly lifted his head, and his empty eyes finally met mine. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place for him, a horrifying and complete picture of his own destruction. "That was you too," he whispered. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact acknowledging the last piece of his ruin. I did not deny it. I simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Yes, son, that was me." I stood up from my desk for the first time since they had entered the room. I was not just a trustee anymore. I was a father about to deliver the final and most important lesson of his son's life. "You think this was about money or property?" "Marcus," I began, my voice quiet but filling the silent room. "You think this was about revenge for a moment of disrespect? You are wrong. It was never about those things. The money, the house, they are just tools. They can be earned, and as you have just learned, they can be taken away in an instant. You were so proud of your career, of being a self-made man who had climbed a ladder at a prestigious company, but you were never self-made. Your career was built on a foundation you never knew existed, a foundation of a father's love and an old friend's loyalty, a foundation you never once acknowledged and never showed any gratitude for. For the past several years, you and your wife have treated me not as your father, but as a line item on your monthly budget and expense to be managed and minimized. You rationed my food in my own home. You ignored my basic needs. You made me feel like a ghost of burden. You valued the opinion of your boss more than the dignity of the man who raised you. The glass of water you threw in my face was free, Marcus. It cost you nothing in the moment, but the lesson I'm teaching you now will cost you everything you thought you owned because you have a fundamental misunderstanding of value. True worth is not in your bank account. It is not in the title on your business card or the square footage of your house. True worth is in your character. It is measured by how you treat the people who loved you into existence. It is measured by the respect you show to those who paved the way for you. You disrespected me. But worse than that, you disrespected the memory of your mother, the woman who taught you how to be a good and decent man. You failed her test, son. You failed every test of character that was ever put in front of you. I have taken away your house, your money, and your career. I have stripped away all the things you hid behind. Now, there is nothing left but you, a man with nothing. Go out there and find out what that is worth. Go out there and for the first time in your life, build your own table. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the quiet calm of the business class lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The chair I was in was made of soft black leather, and it was more comfortable than any piece of furniture in the house I'd just left behind. Through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see massive airplanes taking off and landing, their movement slow and graceful against the backdrop of a clear blue Georgia sky. A quiet jazz melody played softly through hidden speakers, and the air smelled of good coffee and possibility. I took a slow sip of my drink, a fine single malt scotch, a small luxury that I no longer had to justify or hide. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. The demolition was complete. The silence I was sitting in now was not the silence of tension or of absence. It was the silence of serenity. I reached into the inner pocket of my travel blazer and pulled out my ticket. I did not need to check the flight number or the gate. I just wanted to look at it one more time. The destination was printed in bold black letters, Accra, Ghana. It was the place Ruby and I had always dreamed of, visiting, a journey back to the roots we had only read about in books. And just below the destination were the two most beautiful words I had ever read one way. This was not a vacation. This was a relocation. I was not running away from my old life. I was walking toward a new one. I felt no guilt, no lingering anger. I had made my decisions with the cold clarity of a surgeon. The operation had been painful, but it had been necessary to cut out the disease of disrespect that had been poisoning my family. I had done my duty as the trustee of Ruby's legacy, and I had done my final duty as a father. I had given my son the one thing he had never had before, a rock bottom from which to build a life of his own. Whether he would build it with integrity and character or not was no longer my concern. My work was done. A polite announcement echoed through the lounge, signaling the boarding for my flight. I finished the last of my scotch, the warmth spreading through my chest. I stood up, gathered my carry-on bag, and walked toward the gate. Each step felt light, unburdened. I was not just walking onto an airplane, I was walking toward the rest of my life. And I was doing it for me and for Ruby. Before I put my phone away, I had one final piece of business to attend to. I opened my personal banking app, an account separate from the trust, an account that belonged only to me. My lawyer had given me the details for a new bare-bones checking account that Marcus had been forced to open a few days ago. I initiated a wire transfer. The amount was not random. It was exactly $5,000. It was not enough to give him comfort, but it was enough to provide a foundation. It was enough for a security deposit on a modest apartment and the first month's rent. It was a chance, not a handout. In the memo section for the transfer, I did not write a long emotional message. I typed just a few simple words. A final lesson, and the only inheritance you are going to get. Build a life of character, not of comfort. Earn your own respect. This is the last gift. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed a confirmation message. The money was gone. The final tie had been cut. I closed the app and turned off the phone. The account was settled. As the airplane climbed through the clouds, I watched the coastline of America recede until it was just a thin line between the vast blue of the ocean and the endless blue of the sky. With it, I felt the last years of my life, the years of quiet indignity, the years of feeling like a ghost in my own family just fall away. I was not filled with sadness or regret. I was filled with a lightness I had not felt since I was a young man. I thought of Ruby, and I could almost feel her hand in mine. I imagined her smiling, looking out the window with that same spark of adventure in her eyes that I felt in my own heart. We were finally taking our trip together. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. I do not know what awaits me in this new chapter of my life, but I know I will meet it on my own terms. My son's journey is his own now. I gave him a clean slate. Whether he builds a life of value upon it is up to him. My journey is finally mine again. A legacy is not built on the stone foundations of a house, but on the granite of character. When we shield our children from the weight of the world, we rob them of the muscle to carry it. Dignity is the only currency that cannot be devalued, and once reclaimed, it pays dividends of peace. I left them in that study surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. I walked back to my suite, and for the second time that night, I locked the door. But this time, the lock didn't feel like a defensive measure. It felt like a seal on a finished document. The days that followed were a study in the slow, agonizing death of an illusion. The silence in the house was no longer the sterile quiet of a hotel. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a morgue. I stayed in my wing, mostly venturing out only for coffee or a simple meal, which I prepared myself in the kitchen, while Marcus and Nia avoided me like a plague. But I could hear them. I could hear the frantic, hushed arguments that erupted behind their closed bedroom door. I could hear the weeping that often followed, and I could hear the physical dismantling of their lives. The eviction notice was not a suggestion, and the loss of Marcus's income was a fatal blow to their ability to maintain even a facade of their former lifestyle. They had 30 days to leave, but the reality of their financial ruin meant they had to move much faster. They needed cash, and they needed it immediately. On the third day, the estate sale company arrived. It was a humiliating necessity. They had to liquidate everything they could not take with them, which was almost everything. The large custom sofas, the oversized dining table, the decorative vases that cost more than a week's groceries. None of it would fit in the small apartment they were scrambling to secure. I watched from my window as the estate sale sign was hammered into the manicured lawn. It was a beacon of failure in a neighborhood that worshipped success. The neighbors, the Abernathy's, the Sterlings, the people Marcus and Nia had tried so desperately to impress, drove by slowly in their luxury cars. I saw Mrs. Abernathy slow her Mercedes to a crawl, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses scanning the sign and the activity on the driveway. She did not stop to offer help. She did not call. She simply observed the crash with the detached curiosity of someone watching a reality television show. The social ostracization was immediate and absolute. Marcus and Nia had built their friendships on the shaky ground of status and shared consumption. When the status evaporated, so did the friends. Fish.
They were learning the hard way that the people who drink your champagne when you are up are rarely the ones who will help you pack your boxes when you are down. Saturday was the day of the sale. Strangers tramped through the house, touching the furniture, haggling over the price of crystal stemware, and criticizing the condition of the rugs. It was a violation of privacy that Nia would have found intolerable just a week ago. Now she sat in the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen, signing paperwork with a trembling hand while strangers walked away with the trophies of her vanity for pennies on the dollar. Marcus was nowhere to be seen during the sale. I later learned he had spent the day driving around the city trying to sell his luxury car back to the dealership. He returned that evening in a battered 10-year-old sedan, a humbling replacement for the symbol of power he had driven for years. The look on his face when he walked into the driveway and saw the sold stickers on the living room furniture was a portrait of absolute devastation. He looked up and saw me watching from my window. For a moment his eyes flashed with that old familiar anger, but it was weak and fleeting. It quickly collapsed into shame. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. He was beginning to understand the true weight of the build-your-own-table speech. He was currently without a chair, let alone a table. The house emptied out room by room. The echoes grew louder. The dismantling was not just physical, it was psychological. Every item sold, every box packed was a stripping away of the identity they had constructed. Without the house, without the job, without the stuff, who were they? They were finding out that underneath the designer clothes and the corporate titles, they were two frightened children who had never learned how to survive in the real world. I did not interfere.
I did not offer to help pay for the movers. I did not offer a loan to bridge the gap. To do so would have been to rob them of the lesson. I was the trustee of their education now, And the curriculum was harsh. On the final day, the moving truck arrived. It was not a professional service with uniformed men and padded blankets. It was a rental truck driven by Marcus himself. He and Naya spent hours lugging boxes down the stairs, their movement slow and exhausted. There was no staff to direct, no caterers to clean up. There was just the sweat on their brows and the ache in their backs. I stood on the front porch as they loaded the last box. It was a humid Georgia afternoon, the air thick with the scent of pine and impending rain. Marcus closed the back of the truck with a metallic clang that echoed through the empty neighborhood. He turned and looked at the house one last time. He looked at the manicured lawn he would no longer mow. He looked at the grand pillars he would no longer walk between. And then he looked at me. I stood there calm and still a sentinel at the gates of the paradise he had forfeited. He walked up the steps, slowly stopping a few feet away from me. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by the friction of reality. He looked tired, deeply and profoundly tired. I left the keys on the counter, he said, his voice raspy. The place is clean. I nodded. Thank you, Marcus. He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Something angry or pleading or perhaps even apologetic. But the words seemed to die in his throat. The chasm between us was too wide now, filled with the debris of his choices. Goodbye, Dad, he finally whispered. Goodbye, son, I replied. He turned and walked down the steps, his shoulders slumped. He climbed into the cab of the rental truck next to Nia, who sat staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me or the house. The engine roared to life, a rough, unrefined sound compared to the purr of his old luxury car. I watched them drive away. I watched the truck turn the corner and disappear from view. And as they vanished, I felt the final tether snap. The house was silent. The driveway was empty. The lesson had been delivered. I went back inside and walked through the empty rooms. The ghosts of the dinner party were gone. The memory of the water hitting my face was gone. The house was just a structure now, wood and brick and glass. It was an asset to be liquidated by the trust. Its purpose had been served. I called Jeremiah. The house is vacant, I said. You can list it in the morning. Understood, Isaiah, he replied. And your travel arrangements. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. Everything is ready. I hung up the phone and went to my suite, the only room that still held the warmth of a home. I packed my single suitcase. I didn't take much. I did not need the artifacts of this life. I was traveling light, carrying only the essentials. My clothes, my passport, the photo of Ruby, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing you have done what is right, even when it was the hardest thing you have ever had to do. The next morning, I stood on the curb as the taxi pulled up. I did not look back at the house as we drove away. My eyes were fixed on the horizon on the road ahead. The bitterness was gone. The anger was gone. There was only the steady rhythm of the tires on the pavement carrying me toward the airport and toward the future. While I was carried away on the smooth leather seats of the taxi, watching the Atlanta skyline drift past like a memory, Marcus and Nia were colliding with the hard concrete of their new reality. Their destination was a nondescript apartment complex on the outer edges of the city, a place where the paint was peeling and the parking lot was a graveyard of rusted vehicles. It was called the Pines, but there was not a single pine tree in sight. There was only a sprawling expanse of cracked asphalt and the relentless hum of the nearby interstate. Marcus parked the rental truck in front of Building C. He killed the engine, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence in the cab was heavy, suffocating. They stared up at the third-floor window that was now theirs. It was a dark, square hole in a beige stucco wall. There were no grand pillars here. There was no manicured lawn. There was only a metal staircase that rattled in the wind and an overflowing dumpster that smelled of rot and neglect. This is it. Marcus said, his voice devoid of inflection. Naya did not answer. She just opened her door and stepped out onto the oil-stained pavement. Her heels, the expensive Italian ones she had refused to sell, clicked sharply on the asphalt, a sound that seemed too delicate and too loud for this rough place. She looked around, clutching her purse to her chest as if she were afraid the air itself might rob her. They spent the next 4 hours moving their boxes up the 3 flights of stairs. There was no elevator. The stairwell smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. With every step, every heavy box, the last vestiges of their former dignity were sweated away. Marcus, who used to pay a trainer to keep him fit in a climate-controlled gym, was now gasping for breath, his designer t-shirt soaked through with the grime of manual labor. By the time they finished, the sun had set, and the apartment was cast in the harsh blue glow of the streetlights outside. The space was small, a 1-bedroom box with beige carpets that had seen better decades, and a kitchen that was little more than a hallway with a stove. The boxes they had brought filled the living room, leaving only narrow pathways to navigate. They collapsed onto the floor amidst the cardboard towers. There was no furniture to sit on. They had sold the sofas, the chairs, the dining table. They had nothing but the clothes in their suitcases and the mattress they had dragged into the bedroom. "I am hungry," Nia said. Her voice was small, stripped of the imperious tone she used to command the catering staff. Marcus laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "We have no food, Nia. We have no plates. We have no forks. Order something." She snapped, the old irritation flaring up. "Just order a pizza?" Marcus pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the delivery app. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he looked up at his wife. "I can't," he whispered. "What do you mean you can't? I can't pay for it, Nia. The delivery fee, the tip, it is $25 for a pizza."
We have $300 in cash to last us until I find a job. We can't afford a pizza. The reality of his words hit her like a physical slap. She stared at him, her eyes wide with horror. The woman who had thrown a fit over a declined platinum card was now being told she could not afford a pepperoni pizza. "I will go to the convenience store down the street," Marcus said, standing up slowly, his knees popping. "I will get us some bread and maybe some peanut butter. It is protein. It is cheap." He walked out of the apartment, leaving her alone in the dark among the boxes. As he walked to the store under the flickering streetlights, Marcus felt a strange sensation. It was not anger, and it was not sadness. It was a terrifying vulnerability. He was a man without a shield. For the first time in his life, there was no safety net. There was no trust fund, no daddy to call, no lawyer to fix it. There was just him and the night, and the empty space in his wallet.
The days that followed were a blur of rejection and humiliation. Marcus sat at the small, wobbly card table they had bought from a thrift store, applying for jobs on his laptop. He applied for marketing director positions, first convinced that his resume would speak for itself. He sent out dozens of applications. He called headhunters he had worked with in the past. The silence was deafening. The headhunters who used to take him out for expensive lunches did not return his calls. The emails went unanswered. Finally, after a week, he managed to get an old colleague on the phone. Marcus, the man, said, his voice lowered as if he were afraid of being overheard. "Look, I can't help you." "What do you mean you can't help me?" Marcus asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "I have the numbers. I led the department to record growth. It is not about the numbers, Marcus. Word is out. Otis Vance. He is a powerful man, and he is very well liked in this town." He let it be known that you were let go for cause. Ethical cause. People talk, Marcus. Nobody's going to touch you. You are radioactive. The line went dead. Marcus sat there staring at the phone. The truth washed over him, cold and absolute. His father had not just fired him. He had burned the bridge so thoroughly that not even the ashes remained. The network he thought he had built, the reputation he thought was his, it was all an illusion. It was all borrowed light reflecting off his father's sun. And now the sun had set. He lowered his sights. He applied for manager positions, then associate positions, then entry-level sales jobs. The result was the same. Overqualified, they said.
or simply not a good cultural fit. 2 weeks into their new life, the tension in the small apartment reached a breaking point. The air was thick with accusation. Naya paced the small living room like a caged cat. "This is your fault," she hissed. "All of it. If you hadn't thrown that water."
If you hadn't been such an idiot. My fault? Marcus shot back, standing up. You were the one who treated him like a servant. You were the one who counted his calories and complained about the budget. You were the one who told me to cut him off. "I was trying to manage our future," she screamed. "I was trying to protect us. And now look at us, Marcus. Look at where we are. I am eating peanut butter sandwiches in a dump. I can't live like this." "Then leave," Marcus roared, throwing his hands up. "Go find someone else to sponge off of. Because the bank is closed." "Nia." "The bank is closed forever." She stopped pacing. She looked at him with a cold, hard calculation. It was the same look she had given the estate sale appraisers when she was haggling over the price of her jewelry. "Maybe I will," she said quietly. She walked into the bedroom and slammed the door. Marcus sank onto the floor, his back against the wall. He put his head in his hands. He was alone, truly and completely alone. The silence of the apartment was different than the silence of the mansion. The mansion's silence had been sterile, empty. This silence was heavy, filled with the weight of consequences. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his new bank account. A deposit had cleared. He opened the app. $5,000. He stared at the number. It was a fortune to him now. It was rent. It was food. It was survival. He read the memo line again. Build a life of character, not a comfort. Earn your own respect. Tears pricked his eyes hot and stinging. He finally understood. The money wasn't a gift. It was a shovel. His father had not buried him. He had given him the tool to dig himself out. But he had to do the digging. There would be no more handouts. No more rescues. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand as he stood up and walked over to the card table. He closed the tab with the marketing director job listings. He opened a new search window. He typed in a new search query. Not executive, not director, not even manager. He typed general labor, construction, no experience necessary. He looked at his soft manicured hands. Hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen or a wine glass. They were about to learn what work truly meant. He hit enter. Meanwhile, miles above the earth, I was watching the sunset from 30,000 feet. The sky was a bruised purple, fading into a deep indigo. I adjusted my seat, the hum of the engines, a soothing lullaby. I did not know that my son was sitting on a stained beige carpet looking at job listings for manual labor. I did not know that his marriage was crumbling or that he was eating peanut butter for dinner. But I hoped. I hoped that the pain was sharp enough to cut through the callous of his entitlement. I hoped that the silence of his new life was loud enough for him to finally hear his own thoughts. I had broken his life not to destroy him, but to reset him. I had taken away the stage so he could finally stop performing and start living. The flight attendant walked down the aisle, a warm smile on her face. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Ramsey?" I smiled back, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "No, thank you," I said. "I have everything I need." And I did. I had my dignity. I had my peace. And for the first time in a long time, I had hope. The plane bank left, turning toward the east, toward the ocean, toward Ghana. I closed my eyes and let the motion carry me. The past was a country I had left behind. The future was waiting, and I was ready to meet it. The alarm clock on the floor of the empty apartment screamed at 4 a.m. It was a harsh metallic sound that sliced through the thin walls of the pines. Marcus rolled over on the mattress, his body aching from the tension of the last few weeks. He reached out to silence the noise, and his hand brushed against the cold, empty space beside him. She was gone. Nia had left 2 days ago. She had not left a note or a forwarding address. She had simply packed her remaining designer clothes into her suitcase and called a friend she had previously despised to come pick her up. She had chosen dignity and dependency over dignity in struggle. Marcus was not surprised. In fact, he felt a strange sense of relief. The final artifact of his fake life had removed itself. He stood up in the dark. He put on the heavy work boots he had bought from a surplus store with the last of his cash. They felt heavy and foreign on his feet. He put on a pair of stiff denim jeans and a neon yellow safety vest. He looked in the cracked bathroom mirror. The man staring back was not the marketing director of Nexus Solutions. He was tired, he was unshaven, and he was afraid. But for the first time in his life, he was real. The construction site was a muddy scar in the earth on the south side of the city. It was raining a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through his clothes instantly. The foreman was a large man with a voice like a gravel mixer. He looked at Marcus's soft hands and shook his head with a look of skepticism that Marcus knew he deserved. "You are on the shovel today, college boy," he barked, pointing at a massive pile of wet gravel. "Move that pile to the trench over yonder. Do not stop until it is gone." Marcus picked up the shovel. It was heavy. The handle was rough wood that bit into his uncalloused palms. He dug the blade into the gravel. The shock of the impact vibrated up his arms, rattling his teeth. He lifted the load and threw it toward the trench. He did it again. And again. By 9 in the morning, his hands were blistered and bleeding. By noon, his back felt like it was on fire. The physical pain was blinding, consuming every thought in his head. He wanted to quit. He wanted to throw the shovel down and walk away. He wanted to call his father and beg for forgiveness, to promise anything just to make the pain stop. But he didn't. He wiped the rain and sweat from his eyes, and he thought about the 4-ounce piece of salmon. He thought about the eviction notice. He thought about the glass of water. He realized that every shovel of dirt he moved was a repayment of a debt he had never acknowledged. He was not just moving gravel. He was excavating his own soul. He was learning the lesson his father had tried to teach him with words, but could only teach him with silence. He gripped the handle tighter, ignoring the blood on his palms, and he kept digging. Thousands of miles away, the air was different. I stepped off the plane onto the tarmac in Accra, and the heat hit me like a warm embrace. It did not smell of rain and mud and desperation. It smelled of spices and red clay and the salt of the ocean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a new continent. I walked through the terminal, my step light and steady. I was not a refugee running from a broken family. I was a pilgrim arriving at a holy place. I thought of Ruby. I thought of how she would have loved the colors, the noise, the vibrant, chaotic energy of the city that swirled around me. I felt her presence beside me, not as a ghost, haunting a cold room, but as a memory made peace. I had left the sterile mansion behind. I had left the silence behind. I hailed a taxi, and as I gave the driver the name of the small hotel I had booked, I looked out at the horizon. I was ready to make noise again. I was ready to live. The most painful lesson Isaiah had to learn was that shielding his son from struggle was not an act of love, but an act of theft. He had stolen Marcus's chance to build his own character. This story teaches us that true inheritance is not found in a trust fund or a deed, but in the calloused hands of hard work and the quiet dignity of self-respect. We cannot buy loyalty, and we cannot purchase love. Sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to burn the bridge that enabled the disrespect. Remember that your dignity is non-negotiable, and you are never too old to reclaim the pen and write a new chapter. What would you have done if you were in Isaiah's shoes? Would you have given the money back, or did he do the right thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.